Ellie, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much.
So we have with us Ellie Cooper. She is an author. She is a motorcyclist. I'm in California and she is in the UK. So we're recording this interview. It's 9 o'clock in the morning on Friday the 13th here in California, and it's 5 p.m. there in the UK. So thanks for joining us for this interview. So for some of our listeners and readers, you may recall if you're a subscriber to Rider Magazine, in July of last year, we had a feature by Ellie called The Himalayan Cliffhanger. And it was this really great, gripping story about her riding India's Death Road. It's this road that is carved out of the cliff face that's 2,000 feet above a river. And it's a really harrowing sort of experience that she shares, and with some great photographs. And I'm also pleased to report that we have a second feature by Ellie called India from Head to Toe. It's in our November 2023 issue. The digital edition of that just actually came out today. And she shares her experience riding from really the high passes of the Himalayas in the north of India all the way down to the very southern tip of India, a trip that's some 4,500 miles. And she really shares the breadth and diversity of what India is like, and that experience from riding a motorcycle. But as I said, you're in the UK now. You spent a lot of time in India. And how did you end up there in the first place?
Yeah, I was trapped there in the pandemic actually. So I was only supposed to go across for a month, and then everything all just shut down. And I did have a choice to go home or not. And I don't know. I thought maybe I would just might extend my stay there a little bit and it would all blow over in a couple of weeks. And of course, we know it did not. So then just sort of made India home. We were trapped in one place for 9 months, another place for three, another place for five. And my plan was that the Himalayas was just very free and very open, and they'd cut off from the rest of India. So it was really just like a bit of a playground. You know, everyone was a bit freer up there, and there weren't so many rules, and really, like, the Himalayas were completely empty. So my plan was, I need to sort of get out and go up into the mountains. And yeah, it became possible. I'm not quite sure how. I sort of jumped on a scooter and learned to ride that, and then decided that that wasn't quite enough for me, and I wanted to try a motorbike. And yeah, just on very empty, sort of shut down roads with like big steep drops, and in the mountains, in the Himalayas, just in the foothills in Rishikesh. That's where I learned to drive, and I was just totally self-taught. I just took a bike, rented it for a week, and just sort of went off on an adventure, and that's how I started riding in
Wow.
India.
So when you lived in the UK, you didn't ride a motorcycle before. All of this was during
Yeah,
your lockdown pandemic experience in India.
exactly. No, I honestly, I thought it would be something really fun to try. And I didn't even have a driving license, to be honest. I didn't have a driving license for a car or anything. I had no experience on a motorbike at all. It was just something I felt that I had to do. Can't explain it. Just it was time to start being a motorcyclist.
Wow. So I mean, I'm sure we can all think back. I mean, it for some people it's dark experience. Everybody went through their own pandemic experience, but I was somebody who was at home, and most people during lockdown were, they were isolated in a place that they're familiar with, they're comfortable with.
Mm,
You were visiting India and the lockdown happened, so you basically are in a completely different country, very different cultural experience than the
mhm.
UK. What was that like to be in that sort of environment when everything unfolded, and nobody really knew what was going on, at least and I'm talking about being in the United States. It was very
Mm.
mysterious for a long time. So getting information, figuring out what you're supposed to do, what you can't do, and so forth. What was that like in a completely different, unusual environment?
For sure. India has this culture of really taking care of each other, and I think that was really evident actually in the pandemic. So even though things got shut down, even though the roads were closed, the tourists were taken care of. There was always people giving meals on the street, and taking care of all the people that came through Rishikesh where I was. Um, Restaurants would sort of like blink their lights three times so that you knew it was ready and you could go and grab some food and then sneak away again across the street back into lockdown. I mean, the Indians, they really believe there's a river that runs through Rishikesh, River Gang. They call it Ganga, but it's the River Ganges, and they really believe that it purified and kept you safe. And so they just said, until COVID gets to us, we're not going to deal with it. We're just going to keep our lives the same and take care of each other, and just look at wellness and try to take care of ourselves until it comes. So they were still playing cricket, you know, there were the Indians out the back playing cricket. It
Right.
was kind of great. So we all had rules, we all stuck to them, but everyone really took care of each other. And my experience was just complete kinship between the Indians and the foreigners. It was great.
Well, you were saying that you were in the Himalayas, the foothills of the Himalayas. Of course, you know, India's got a population of over 1 billion people. In some places,
Mm.
there's enormously crowded cities, but you're in a place where sounds like it was the perfect place to social distance. You were in a place that didn't have a lot of population, and you could sort of be outdoors, but not necessarily be around a lot of other people. So, did COVID not really have a big impact on that part of India when you were there?
Well, they were really clever. They actually shut off the foothills of the Himalayas and they just didn't let anyone in or out. And that included the police. So actually, we had like no law for
Wow.
ages. And everyone who was sort of in the restaurants was given the job of being a policeman. Anyone who sort of worked in the village shop was also sort of given that privilege. And so everyone just sort of muddled along and did the best they could and sort of sorted out themselves in society without actually that need for real strictness.
Right.
But they did come along with sticks occasionally to come and hit people and get them back in the houses, which
Wow.
worked.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. But I actually started in the south. I was in Kerala, and I just had this feeling in the middle of the night, and I just booked a plane and went straight to the Himalayas. And I don't know how I knew it was going to get much worse, but the Indians in Kerala, they told me that COVID was in the sea and that I shouldn't go swimming. And I thought, well, with that mentality, that makes no
Right.
sense.
Right.
So I got myself out, went to the went to the
Right.
mountains, just so I could see a bit of sky if I was going to be trapped.
Right. Right.
So that was the plan. And then I ended up staying there for 9 months in lockdown. So yeah.
Wow. Well, I just we'll get to this maybe a little bit more, but you've published a book called "Waiting for Mango Season."
Yeah.
I tore through that book flying. You know, I went to the Barber Vintage Festival last weekend and I read it cover to cover on the plane. The great thing is because you basically share your story about how you ended up in India and what your experience was like going, you know, through this, you know, trying to
Mm.
get to the north, so forth. You're getting involved in motorcycling. So anyway, I highly recommend. It's available on Amazon. Ellie Cooper is the author. The name is Waiting for Mango Season. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but I just want to say, if anybody wants to really get a really in-depth and I think a very personal and honest account of what your experience was like there. It was a very touching book, very honest book, and like I said, it was very readable. I went right through it in a matter of hours. So
Mm.
you got up into the Himalayas, and so tell us about how, like I said, how you got into riding the motorcycle. Was it a way for you to get around? Was it just a way to pass the time, or you know, what was it?
Yeah, of course. Well, it had come to about 8, 9 months, and the lockdown was lifting. There was rumors that we would soon be free, and everyone would be able to move around again. And I just thought, I've got to go. I've got to get out. And I was already so close to the Himalayas, and I'd already dreamt of going up there. Um, but I'd always done public transport before, and now I had these skills on this bike that we'd messed around on, and I just thought, brilliant! I'm just going to set off and go. So me and a pal rented two bikes. I don't know how they rented them to us. I have no idea. We had one license between us. It was quite amazing, really. They just sort of trusted and let us go off on these bikes on this epic trip for about 7 to 10 days, right up into the top. Really, really I want to say about 14,000, 15,000 feet high on the roads. We had the best time, and I really learned to ride in that time. That was
Right.
really tricky, really difficult roads, really fast traffic, high precipices, huge inclines. Yeah, and that's in sort of like the Uttarakhand area of India. So that it's great riding, by the way.
Wow.
Amazing hairpin bends, just gorgeous.
Well, I mean, you
Just
know, I know what.
decided on a whim, really.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I know what it's like learning to ride on fairly flat roads and in pretty basic environments. And, you know, a lot of people, you know, sometimes learn to ride in parking lots or on back roads, but to basically
Mm,
some what it sounds like very challenging riding. You know, I have ridden in India once. I was at a Royal
mm.
Enfield launch back in January of this year. It's a pretty much a free for all in terms of, you know, what people do on the roads. It's somewhat organized chaos, and but then when you're talking about being on very steep roads and probably the road conditions in terms of surface and so forth, all of that stuff is difficult for even an experienced motorcyclist. So that was your baptism by fire, it sounds like.
Oh, absolutely. And I'd never done a hill start before. Do you know what I mean? Like I was
Yeah,
I was doing hill starts and rolling backwards into the cars behind me. It was a trial by fire massively
yeah,
because I think it's made me a much better rider because I've been on every surface now. In the
right,
first week I was on gravel and mud and just this really sort of like thin sand that sort of like moves the bike around. It was mad. Every 2 minutes the landscape changes in India as soon as you go to the
right,
Himalayas, and you can be prepared for nothing. It doesn't matter
right,
if it's huge trucks coming your way and refusing to move, or whether it's a herd of cows asleep, which is usually why you don't drive at night,
right,
because they're really hard to see.
right, right.
But being prepared for anything at any point, I think it's made me a much better rider, and actually the fear's gone, which
Yeah,
is a massive thing.
sure.
I'm not scared of the road. And I think that's a big thing, is when you learn to drive over a certain amount of time, and you would think of India as something to work up to, but because that was my first thing, take everything with a pinch of salt these days.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. So tell us about so you started with a scooter, you rented a motorcycle for a short period of time, but then you
Yeah.
bought your own bike. So tell us about how you bought a bike and tell us about the name that you gave your bike.
Yeah, for sure. So I was on an Avenger first, and that was the rental bike. And the back wheel was really slippy. It didn't do well in the mud, and I wasn't keen. And so I thought, no, I'd like to try an Enfield. And I was down in Goa, and we heard news that again the lockdown was going to come. It was the second one, and I thought, oh
Right,
no, not again. And I'd had such fun in the mountains, I decided to go back. And so I started looking for a bike. I thought I'd really like to ride up India.
right.
Um, and go back to the mountains that way. And me and my partner at the time, he already had a bike. So we started looking for me, and I drive past this garage, and this knackered looking old military green, chipped paint, rusty old bike is just screaming at me. It's just propped up on the side, and it was more like, here's a garage, here's an example of a motorbike. It looked absolutely ruined, this bike. And I went in and I asked him if he had any bikes for sale. And I didn't think the one out there was for sale. And honestly, to be fair, I didn't think it would run. And when he quoted me a much higher price, which actually at the time was only about $800
Yeah,
for a new one, because everyone was
right,
getting rid of their bikes,
right.
he said, no, I'll give you that one for about 300 English pounds.
Wow.
But it needs about £200 work on it. And I said, brilliant. Can we do it within the week?
Right.
Let's go.
Okay.
Um, Took it for a test drive, fell in love with it, ended up driving quite far. But then when the lockdown came, I had to put the whole thing on a train and take it the rest of the way to the Himalayas. And putting it on a train is an experience in itself, because that's a whole other ball game.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So tell us about the name that you gave. This is a Royal Enfield 350. It's a Machismo is the model.
Machismo, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Um, so I called her Ulu. So in India, there's a bit of most people call their bikes something powerful, right? And we've
Right.
all it's across the world that way too. But they usually call it after like a god or a goddess, and there's millions of gods in Hinduism. And so I thought, right, there's a character in a story. It's a white owl, and one of the goddesses, she rides into battle on this white owl. And I thought, well, I'll be in the mountains. I'm almost at the top of the sky. It seems very fitting. And so I called her Ulu, which means
Ah,
white owl.
white owl.
Yeah.
Great. Great. Well, I know you share this in some of the articles that you've published in Writer, as well as in
Mm,
great detail in your book. I know that you've had some challenges with Ulu in terms of keeping her running.
mm.
It's a bike that you said was already pretty used and abused when you got it, and
Yes.
you've put some miles on it. So I
Yeah.
know you've had challenges, finding people to work on it,
Mm.
and so forth. But so tell us about how you ended up, you know, uh, basically using Ulu to travel through India. I mean, it's a big country. There's a lot going on there. So
Mm.
what motivated you to just say, hey, I'm going to explore this country by motorcycle?
Well, everybody said don't take a classic motorbike into the Himalayas. Don't do it. It'll break down and no one will know how to fix your bike because it's a machismo. It was difficult to get the parts. But I thought, if I have the parts with me already, brilliant, can't go
Right.
wrong. So I don't know. She just wouldn't quit. It didn't matter what I did with this bike, where I went. Her suspension is fantastic. I was driving through really difficult terrain, and I would see bikes littered along the mountains where people had just given up. They'd given up on their bikes, and Ulu just didn't quit. Didn't matter what I did to her, what I drove her through, rivers, mountain streams, anything. She was fantastic. And so I just thought, I wonder how far I can take her. And the dream was always to cross India. But I thought I would do south to north, and instead I just went all the way down. And I didn't stop, except, for refueling, and really to just like experience the places that I wanted to on the way down and spend time with locals. But yeah, it just became the only mission, which was just to conquer Ladakh to Kanyakumari.
So, in the Himalayas, what most of us have not been there. It's what one of the things that's truly breaking my heart is in a couple of weeks, Royal Enfield's doing a Himalayan launch in the Himalayas.
Yes.
It's going to be based in Manali.
Yeah.
And so I went to, as I said, I went to India for in Rajasthan for the Super Meteor 650 launch, and that
Yes.
was a great experience. But it's a very flat area. The roads are very straight. It was not really what I would call enjoyable riding. So the idea
Yep.
to be able to ride in the Himalayas on a Royal Enfield, it's always been kind of a bucket list dream because I know there's tours
Mm.
you can do. So unfortunately, I'm not able to attend that launch. We're sending somebody else. So I'm really heartbroken to miss, seeing that in person, that area. But that's an area, of course, the highest mountains in the world. So you were conquering
Mhm.
passes that were, some of them were over 16, 17,000 feet. And you're doing this on a very low powered motorcycle. What were the conditions like on some of those roads?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to be prepared for anything when you set off. So actually, it was landslide season. It was right in the middle of the monsoon. Luckily, Ladakh, right at the top, there's a rain shelf. So actually, past a certain point, you don't get any rain. But we did get snow, and God, the storms, the sandstorms when you get to the desert part, right in the
Yeah.
middle, halfway between Manali and Leh. Yeah, just had to be prepared for anything. I mean, so again, I was still quite green actually. Like I didn't know an awful lot about mechanics, but every time she broke, I would learn something new. And so I knew that I needed to change my carburetor jet, for example. Wasn't possible on the way up, but on the way back down, managed to change it. Completely different bike,
Right.
if you get it right.
Right.
Deciding sort of what oil and stuff to put in. It was all stuff I had to learn to make her run the best way that she could. So as soon as I changed my jet, she was a different bike. But yeah, I mean, I was standing on the pegs the whole way up, most of the inclines, with a passenger on the back that I've managed to pick up for a little bit and some luggage. So really, I mean, she did really well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
it's so interesting is that it's all relative. It's context in the United States. A 350 is considered a small bike. There's just not many people. There's
Yes.
not people ride them on the roads. And here you are talking about conquering some of the highest roads in the world in terms of passes
Mm-hmm.
you can go over. And you've got not only yourself, you've got a passenger, you've got luggage, you've got
Mm-hmm.
the wrong carburetor jet in an old beat up bike, but you
Yeah.
managed. You got through it, and sounds like what really comes through, particularly because you've got much more detail in your book,
Mm.
Waiting for Mango Season, is that there's really an affection that you have for your motorcycle. I know a lot of
Oh,
people bond
massively. Yeah.
with their bikes, but especially when you've gone through really challenging circumstances, it sounds like
Mm.
it wasn't the easiest ride in any way, shape, or form, but it also was, so anyway, that's a great part of
Mm.
the book. It's just the connection between you and your bike, and you said that your bike never, Ulu never gave up on you, and you never gave up on her. So
Yeah,
that was great. So
it's true.
yeah,
Yeah, thank you. I really feel like that way. I always joke back in the UK, and I don't really have many rider friends back in the UK anymore.
yeah.
And I always say to them, some people have kids and some people have motorbikes. And I feel like she takes all my money,
Right, right.
like she behaves badly sometimes, but God,
Right,
I love her. Yeah,
right. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
So share with us a little bit as you kind of come down out of the Himalayas. What are some of the other kind of landscapes and experiences that you went through as you went all the way to the south? Again, I know, like I said, India is a big
Mm.
country. So what other sort of environments did you see?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, I started up in the Himalayas, which, as anyone who's ever been there will tell you, it goes from desert to snow to thick mud to green pastures. It's stunning. Every 400 kilometers, it will change, every 200 sometimes. And it's incredible. The boulders you have to cross with those bikes and the nalas, which are like massive streams, rivers, everything. So the Himalayas itself it was different kind of continents, to be fair. In a way, it really felt like I was crossing the world. And then at the foothills, it really starts to get sort of hot and dense and like very humid, and lots of sandstorms, which it just, when you hit the bottom of the mountains, that's usually what will happen. You get lots and lots of sandstorms. So driving through those was a massive experience. Gets drier and drier as you go through Rajasthan and the desert. But it's not all sand. I mean, if you go really, really far out to, gosh, like Jaipur and Jaisalmer, you can go much, much, much further, like Rann of Kutch, and it's just white sand. But then it starts to sort of, you get oases and gorgeous like plantations and trees, and bobs down into jungle for like Udaipur. Um, yeah, just gorgeous. And the cultures change, of course, as you go. So the food changes. It's ever so different tastes as you go down, little differences. The languages change. Suddenly people don't speak Hindi anymore as you go into Tamil Nadu. And I don't know so much Hindi, but I know enough to get by. And
Right.
suddenly I was communicationless, really. There was not a lot of English spoken in both Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, and then Kerala. And so you go through jungle and it's just lush coconut plantations, really big cities like Mumbai. And I think just because I'm me, I wanted the extra challenge of trying to do Mumbai at rush hour, which is something I've always dreamed of. I don't know why. I thought if you're going to do it,
Yeah,
really go
yeah,
for it. Mumbai at rush hour was one of the most fun drives I've ever had. It was like being in Mario Kart or something. It was
yeah.
fantastic. Yeah, and then finally down to just beautiful beaches and oh, just really gorgeous. Yeah, it
Oh,
changes a lot, and it was so worth it, the whole ride.
that's fantastic because, there are certain countries that are very large and very diverse, in their, landscapes and topography. And it sounds like, that's very much what you experience in India. And that's not something, people may visit like I did. I went to Rajasthan. I experienced this one sort of area of India and got to see that,
Mm,
but I didn't get to see, the mountains. I didn't get to see the jungles. I didn't get to see so much more, so that you've covered so much of the area. But also, again, what I read in your book is, as you said at the beginning of the interview, is that, you know, part of the Indian culture is to take care of each other. And so that
mm,
you, even though you were a foreigner, especially during a time of lockdown where the lockdown period was not very nice to, foreign people in the United States, but that you were taken care of,
sure.
you were embraced. And even if you didn't speak the language, you weren't ostracized. You were welcomed into these different cities and places where you stayed. And
Mm,
so it sounds like it was a really a wonderful experience. So, yeah, but not without its challenges. I know.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah,
No, definitely. But I just feel really lucky that at that point I had a bike because it was total freedom.
right.
There were stories of people taking the train and getting stuck halfway up India and
Wow,
sleeping in the train station.
right,
Because, of course, then what do you do without the public transport? So, the best thing I could have done was to get that bike and just to have complete autonomy,
right,
to
right.
be able to cross borders when they were open, and to just sort of have the Himalayas as a playground for so
Yeah,
long.
yeah,
Um, yeah, and also you're right about I don't think you see so many different landscapes within one country. I'm desperate to do South America and some other rides. I'm sure it would be
right.
absolutely incredible, but this was the first time that I felt like I was in a country with different countries in one, and yeah, it was breathtaking.
So, from the time that you first arrived in India just before the pandemic lockdown, so that would have been early 2020. How long
Mhm.
were you in the country?
2.5 years before I made it back to see any family. Um, yeah, when it first happened, like repatriation flights and stuff, although they were advertised for the same price online, it was actually about 4 grand to get back,
Wow. Oh my God.
which was just, yeah, it was impossible. Yeah, just a difficult situation. And I'd had such support from, the Indians and the communities where I was. I felt really safe. I never
Yeah.
once felt, scared to go back. I got ill a couple of times, which was fun. That really sort of pushes you. And especially when you get ill on the bike, because when I was right at the top, I found I couldn't eat. The altitude really played with me, and I felt
Right.
that I couldn't eat anything. So I think I made it across. Well, Manali to Leh was basically done on a Snickers bar, couple of bites of rice. Yeah, I don't think I really ate any food. So that was, yeah,
Your book, you talked about eating both ginger and garlic. I know ginger is something that people eat when they have like seasickness if they're on a boat, but does garlic or ginger, does it
yeah.
help with the altitude sickness as well?
For sure. So it helped me. So the great thing
Yeah.
about India is they have lots of holistic medicine, right? So
Right.
somebody's always got something in your pocket which is going to help someone, if
Right.
anyone's in trouble.
Right.
And I mean, you can also buy like medicine for like nothing over there, any pill you need, you just go straight up and ask for it, no doctor's appointment. So there is also that, actually it was learned from the Sherpas. So the Sherpas who, God, they've lived in the mountains for years, and
Right.
they said, you hold ginger under your tongue or you chew it, and it's a reaction within the saliva, which means that it sort of makes you it sort of makes you thirsty, and it's same as eating like a sour sweet. It gets rid of the nausea. And the
Interesting.
garlic as well, same thing. I mean, it could just be that someone told me something and I believed it, but it got me through. And I've heard it's worked for a few other people as well, but for sure they eat a lot of garlic in their food, and yeah. But there were some rules, that don't eat so much protein when you go up to the mountains. A lot of carbs. The body deals with it better.
Right.
Yeah, lots of rules for riding in the mountains.
Sure.
But
Well,
usually really easy, simple things.
well, I think about, I'm trying to put into perspective because I know one of the passes, was it Sach's Pass or SACHS? How do you, Sox Pass? How do you pronounce that?
Sach Pass, yeah.
Sach Pass. Yeah. So that was over
Sach Pass, yeah.
Such over 17,000 feet, if I remember correctly. And so in the United States, within the continental United States, the lower 48, as they call it, the tallest mountain is here in California. It's called Mount Whitney. And it's quite an achievement to be able to climb to the top of it, but it's 14,500 feet. And when I was up there, I remember how completely exhausted I was from just the thin air and oxygen. Some people get very nauseous and so forth. But so I can't imagine riding a motorcycle another 3,000 feet higher than that, and just trying to sort of keep your wits about you. Again, you're talking about having to ride on not so great roads. You're dealing with traffic. You're dealing with, I don't know if there's any livestock up there, but boulders and all kinds of stuff. And it's super thin air. And so your reaction time, your sense of judgment and responsiveness is probably really impaired. So that's quite an achievement.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I don't think I ever really thought about it. I think the best way sometimes to do something is not to prepare, because I think that's where the fear comes from as well. Sometimes when you just take what's thrown at you and you deal with it, it doesn't seem like such a big deal. And then when you get to the bottom, you think, gosh, what did I just do? There was nowhere to grab food. Everything, because of the season, they were just about to close all the passes. And I was desperate to complete Satch Pass and Cliffhanger before I went back down. And I think I did it with 2 or 3 days grace. And so they'd shut everything, they call it a dhaba, like a very small sort of eating house. Or a chadar tent, which are just tents that pop up and feed people. The Indians are great for that, like they always try and take care of everybody, but they were all shut. So I think I did the whole of Satch Pass, which took an entire day, because the weather conditions were so bad I had to pull over a couple of times. I think I did the whole thing on a packet of peanuts. So it's not, and there's a picture you published, I'm sure, and I think I'm lying on the bike with my feet up. And I think I just needed 10 minutes because the air was just so thin.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Just exhausting, absolutely exhausting, but fantastic riding. Wow, I would recommend to anyone to do Satch Pass. And quite tricky too. The downhills, it's a lot of it's slate as well, so really slippy.
Wow.
But gosh, the downhills were fantastic. Yeah.
So you were in India for 2.5 years. You're back in the UK. So sort of what's next? Are you going back to India? Or are you going somewhere else next? What are your plans?
Yeah, well, see, now the problem is you sort of have to top it, don't you? So God knows where that means next, for the next big biking adventure. But I'll be back to India in a couple of weeks. And I didn't touch the East Coast last time. And there's a lot of different, there's a lot of different cultural differences. And I've heard the food's fantastic. So I think I'd really love to try the East Coast this time. And also, I'm quite interested in doing Nepal. I'd like to bike Nepal. So if that materializes, I'd really love to do that and kind of explore those regions. The jungle again in like Assam and Sikkim up in the top, and the tea plantations just sounds wonderful. So I'd love to try that. And then eventually I'd love to really try going overland. We'll see what happens. We'll see what bike I choose to do that. I'm not quite sure Ulu would make it all the way back to the UK. We could definitely try.
That would be quite an epic journey for sure, for sure. Well, I'm glad to hear that you'll be
Yeah,
returning to
absolutely.
India. I mean, it certainly seems like a place that you've developed a great affection for. I mean, it was your home. It took care of you for 2.5 years.
Mm.
And so that's great. I mean, you expected to be there for just a short time. So again, I highly recommend picking up a copy of Waiting for Mango Season. Ellie Cooper's really wonderful book. It's really eminently readable. It's really about her love of India, her love of her motorcycle, and the experiences that she had. She speaks really honestly about some really challenging things, but also really a lot of beautiful moments and experiences you had with people and on your motorcycle. So it's available on Amazon. It's pretty cheap. Get a paperback copy of it. So if people want to follow you, how do they do that? Kind of keep up with what you're doing.
Yeah, of course. I'm on it's true. I'm on Instagram. So it'd be elliecooper.author on Instagram, and I usually post bike videos and updates on there too. And you can also email me at elliecooperbooks@gmail.com. And to be honest, quite a lot of people I write to. They tell me about their experiences biking in different countries. We've got a little community going, so let's see what happens with that. Yeah, I try and keep myself off social media too much, because I think like the experience is not being tied to a desk and not being tied to a computer. And that's
Right.
really why I haven't done the blogging thing. I have to say, I feel it takes a lot of time and energy away from what I want to be doing, which is biking in the great outdoors. So yeah, I prefer to write things down and publish them later and just enjoy the experience.
Well, that's one of the things I really enjoyed about your book. So that you have some sort of short chapters of your book where the text is written in kind of short vignettes or snippets, and it's in italics. Those were almost like they were maybe journal entries that made it
Yeah.
into your book, and then you wove that into the longer narrative. Is that accurate?
Exactly. That's exactly what it was. It was almost like they would just come pouring out of me. And it was just really kind of like a description for anyone who had never been there. I wanted to, I used to be a teacher who worked with a lot of autistic students, and I really understand that need for experiencing things on a sensory level. You know, people will tell you that India is all about the sights, the sounds, the smells, the colors. And it can be overwhelming, but you know, one little smell takes you all the way back there. The colors are something else, and it's really easy to think of India as this really, it can be quite a scary experience to think about going there for the first time. But you know, if you could, oh God, you know, the first bite of some of the street food, or you know, the way that an auntie who, you know, like an older woman in the community, or uncle, somebody who's acts like a father figure, you know, the way that they touch your head to say hello, or you know, there's just lots and lots of really beautiful things about India that I felt needed telling, and that didn't work in a regular narrative. So I
Sure.
just felt it needed to come out like that.
Right. Well, that's great. Well, and a confession I'll make is I'm not a big fan of always being on social media. It's something we do as part of the magazine, but it's just I agree with you. Having the experiences rather than always reading about other people's experiences or having to document your own experiences for some sort of audience. It's that's I can certainly understand that. So again, it's Ellie is ELLIE Cooper.author at on Instagram, and that's Ellie Cooper Books at gmail.com
That's correct.
via email. And then, like I said, Waiting for Mango Season is available on Amazon. And then, of course, if you subscribe to Writer, you can read in the July 2022 issue is Ellie's great account of the Himalayan cliffhanger, this harrowing road that she conquered. And then in the November 2023 issue is she has her account of riding India from head to toe. So thank you very much for sharing your stories with
For
our
sure.
audience. Thank you very much for being on the
Oh,
show.
thank you so much for the invite. And can I just open it? If anybody has any questions about India or anything that they want to know about driving in any of the areas that I've been in, I'd love to hear from you. Please just send me an email or something. It's there's some incredible roads. You just have to know how to find them.
Yeah, sounds great. I'd love to go back to India and experience it. So I'll definitely hit you up for some tips. So for the Writer Magazine Insider Podcast, I'm Greg Drevenstead. Thanks for listening, and keep the rubber side down. If you've enjoyed listening to the Writer Magazine Insider Podcast, please subscribe, leave us a positive rating, and tell your friends. We also encourage you to visit writermagazine.com, where you can get the latest in motorcycle news and reviews and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. You can also subscribe to print and digital editions of Writer Magazine, which is published 12 times a year. Thanks again for listening.